Hello everyone, it's a pleasure to be invited back here. In fact, it's a pleasure to be invited back anywhere actually, it's always a good sign. So I've been here before at these lunch bars, and let me tell you a little bit about who I am and then we'll get on with the talk. So I'm a lawyer by background. I grew up in Australia, but my wife and I have been living here for 10 years and we've added to the population while we've been here as well. I have 3 kids. And I'm also a student here, along with you guys. I'm doing a DPhil, doing a deep philosophical and theological deep dive on the subject of justice. And I just started in October, and boy, there's a lot to read. And I feel it's a real privilege to be invited to come and speak to you on such a weighty topic. If God is so good, why is His church so bad? I must be some sort of sucker for punishment, because I like to go and speak all over the place on really tough questions. And in fact, I wrote a book a year or 2 ago dealing with some of the toughest questions, heartfelt concerns and intellectual objections that people might have about the Christian faith. And I deal with those questions in my book, The Sanity of Belief, Why Faith Makes Sense. And just to say, I brought along 2 copies today to give away for free. So if there's anyone here who's got big questions or objections about Christian faith, they're seeking, searching, I'd love to give away a couple of books. I don't know how to decide how to do that yet, but maybe I'll chat to you guys and figure that out. But let's crack on with this, well, can I say perhaps one of the most difficult and heartfelt questions that many people have today about God or about Jesus or the Bible. It's really the question of the hypocrisy of the church, or the moral failings of the church. As one person put it, if God is so good, why is His church so bad? Is Christianity rather the problem instead of the solution? For example, if God's so good, why are there so many wars, or have there been so many wars between Protestants and Catholics, both of whom are Christians? Or why did many of the Christians in the American South try to use the Bible to condone slavery? Or why has there been child abuse and cover-up of it in Christian-run institutions? Or why is the Russian Orthodox Church supporting a war in the Ukraine? Or why have there been so many moral failures among Christian leaders over money, or sex, or power, or celebrity? Social commentators have reported that it's in light of such moral failures that many people are walking away from the church, just disillusioned with the hypocrisy of it all. In fact, according to a survey from a UK newspaper, more than half of Brits believe religion actually does more harm than good in our society. Hence the question, if God is so good, why is His church so bad? Isn't Christianity the problem rather than the solution? I wonder if you've ever asked a question like that. The first time I ever asked a question like that was when I was a teenager. And I got a phone call from a church leader that I really respected. One of the youth leaders who really seemed to care for us young people. But to my shock, this youth leader was telephoning me to confess that he'd been arrested by the police for child sexual abuse. I couldn't believe it. It was a complete shock. I was about 18 years old, a relatively new Christian. I'd only been going to church for about 12 months. And here I was being forced to wrestle with this awful reality that this same man who'd been reading the Bible with us teenagers and patiently teaching us what it means to follow Jesus had turned out to be a pedophile. I felt so let down, so disillusioned, so angry, and it really forced me to ask some hard questions about my Christian faith, like, what did it mean for my faith if seemingly the best of the Christian church, the leaders, could so spectacularly let me and others down? Did it somehow invalidate my faith? Did it somehow make it less true, less good, less real? So I just want to say up front, if someone who calls themselves a Christian has spectacularly let you down or treated you badly or unfairly, perhaps they've been judgmental or hypocritical, condemning or even abusive, I want to say, I'm so sorry. You shouldn't have been treated that way by a so-called follower of Jesus. Because as I later came to realize, Jesus himself is not like that at all. The view that I eventually came to as a young man and still hold today is that God is good, and we see that most clearly in the person of Jesus Christ, even if there are many things that are not good that have been done in Jesus' name. And that it would be a tragedy for anyone to miss out on knowing the love of Jesus in their life because of the way someone who calls themselves a follower of Jesus has acted. If I can use an imperfect analogy, imagine that you or somebody that you love is a huge football fan. They just love the game and they get so much joy from it. But then one day, at a football match, they're viciously attacked by a gang of football hooligans. And as a result, it's just left a bitter taste in their mouth. And so now they're wondering whether or not to give up on football altogether. What would you say? How would you counsel them? Well, it would depend, wouldn't it, whether you think there's something about football that lends itself to hooliganism, or whether the problem of hooliganism in football stems from somewhere other than the game of football itself. And the question for us, I think, is similar this morning, or this afternoon. Is there something about Christianity that lends itself to evil and abusive behaviour, or does the problem of evil and abusive behaviour stem from somewhere other than Christianity? And in order to answer that question, we should begin by asking, what is it that Jesus Christ himself actually taught about how we ought to live and treat each other? There's a funny little story in the Bible, a short story about Jesus and his disciples. You can find it in the book of Luke, chapter 22, starting from verse 24. And I'll read it out to you because it's so short. It reads like this. A dispute arose among the followers of Jesus as to which of them was to be considered the greatest. But Jesus said to them, kings like to throw their weight around, and people in authority like to give themselves fancy titles. But you are not to be like that. Instead, the greatest among you should be like the youngest, and the one who rules like the one who serves. For who is greater, the one who is at the table or the one who serves the table? Is it not the one who's at the table? But I am among you as one who serves. And then Jesus went on to literally wash his disciples' feet to show them how Christians are meant to live in service and love for others, rather than trying to be better or greater than others. And in his very first sermon, Jesus declared that it's the poor in spirit, the meek, those who have been persecuted, and the peacemakers who are blessed. He teaches his disciples not to return violence with violence, but to turn the other cheek. And unlike most other famous leaders of great movements in history, Jesus Christ never sought domination over other people. In fact, at the critical moment of his ministry, Jesus didn't come riding into Jerusalem on a great white horse, brandishing a huge sword to conquer. In fact, he rode into Jerusalem on a donkey to die, to give his life, not for the evil he had done, but for the evil we have done. And when Jesus was being arrested, he didn't resist. His disciple Peter, he tried to resist. He pulled out a sword and cut off the ear of one of the people who were trying to arrest Jesus. But Jesus immediately told Peter, put away the sword. And then he proceeded to heal the injured man's ear, who was part of the party who was arresting him. And then even when Jesus was being mocked, stripped naked, flogged, spat on, nailed to a cross, he still didn't resist. Instead, he prayed, Father, forgive them. And his example has inspired millions of his followers throughout history to try to love their neighbours and even their enemies in the most trying of circumstances. And there are many trying circumstances today. But Christianity is still the most persecuted religion in the world. In fact, one of the things that got everybody's attention in Christianity's early days was how well they loved. Lucian of Samosata, who was no friend of Jesus and lived in the 2nd century, nonetheless wrote of those early followers of Jesus that the earnestness with which people of this religion help one another in their need is incredible. But it wasn't only how the early Christians treated each other that got everybody's attention, but it was how they treated strangers as well. The Roman Emperor Julian, who hated Christianity and wanted to remove its influence from the empire, wrote in a letter to an official, Why then do we, Romans, not observe how the kindness of Christians to strangers, their care for the burial of their dead, and the sobriety of their lifestyle has done the most to advance their cause? It is disgraceful when no Jew is a beggar, and the impious Galileans, i.e. Christians, support our poor in addition to their own. So what does all this mean? Well, it means that whenever atrocities have been committed against humanity in the name of Christianity, it has been done in direct violation of Jesus' own teaching to not only love our neighbours, but even one's enemies. Therefore, if we are going to judge Christianity fairly, we must be careful to judge it by Christ's own teaching, rather than by the direct abuse of Christ's own teaching. And I don't know if you've ever stopped to consider the influence that the teaching of Christ, or of the Bible as a whole, has had on human history. For example, we take it for granted today that racism is wrong, and sexism is wrong, and the killing of unwanted children is wrong, because we take it to be true that regardless of someone's age, or nationality, or gender, or the colour of their skin, all people are equally precious and valuable. But why do we believe that? Because for most of human history, most people believed in the inherent inequality of people. For most of human history, most people were regarded as somebody else's property. Even the most inspiring democratic rhetoric of ancient Greece never applied to slaves or foreigners or women. Infanticide, the killing of unwanted children, was normal, and according to historians, there was little regard for the poor. So why do most people today believe that all human beings on our planet have inherent value and worth? Well, as historians point out, it's a product of the influence of the Bible as its teaching spread across the globe. Arguably the most revolutionary statements in world history come from the Bible, which teaches that all human beings are valuable because all are created in the image of God and because Christ died for all. And historians tell us that motivated by this teaching of the inherent value of every human being, followers of Jesus have done more than any other group globally to combat slavery, injustice, genocide, infanticide, and abortion on demand, to promote access to education, science, the arts, political freedom, and social justice, and to pioneer hospitals, orphanages, charitable societies, and law reform. It's often forgotten that the anti-slavery movement of the 17th and 18th centuries were led by tireless campaigners such as Wilberforce and Equiano, who were directly motivated by their Christian faith and experience. That the RSPCA was also started by Wilberforce and others motivated by their Christian faith. That the US Civil Rights Movement was a movement of the African American churches. That the downfall of Soviet communism can be attributed in large part to Pope John Paul's influence and the Polish Church. And that the downfall of apartheid in South Africa was in large part due to Archbishop Desmond Tutu and the influence of the church and their role in the Reconciliation Commission. And the interesting thing is, so many people today just don't realise this history. The average person in the UK doesn't realise how different our world would be and our moral beliefs without the pervasive influence of Christian teaching on thought and society over hundreds of years. As one historian, Tom Holland, observes, people in the West, even those who imagine that they've emancipated themselves from Christian belief, are in fact shot through with Christian assumptions about almost everything. All of us in the West are goldfish, and the water that we swim in is Christianity. Now, what Holland is not saying is that if you live in the West, your religious beliefs must be Christian. But what he is saying is that almost everyone's morality is Christian. The morality that says specifically that all human beings have inherent dignity and worth. Him and a lot of other historians are saying that belief, it didn't come from nowhere. It came from the Bible. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, quite a while ago, famously argued that without belief in the Christian God, there is no basis for belief in this morality. As he wrote, when one gives up the Christian faith, one pulls the right to Christian morality out from under one's feet. For this morality is by no means self ever. However bad you might think the world is because of Christianity, have you ever considered the flip side question, which is, can you imagine how much worse the world would be without the influence of Christianity? It's an interesting question to ask. A lot of public intellectuals today are asking that question. And interestingly, a lot of them are atheists, asking, what would the world be like without Christianity? And their answer is very interesting, because despite the fact that in the early 2000s, you had some well-known atheist intellectuals, people like Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens, arguing that the world would be a much better world without Christianity. Now in the 2020s, you've got well-known atheist intellectuals like the historian Neil Ferguson or the social scientist Charles Murray, arguing that the world would be a much worse world without Christianity. Why? Well, because what they're seeing is that as we continue to move away from Christianity as a society, the society is beginning to lose its sense of the value of every human life and of the importance of mercy, of self-sacrificial love, and of forgiveness. And so what they're saying is that we're just sort of beginning to feel for the first time what a society devoid of Christian influence could ultimately become. So for example, people talk about a divided Britain or a united kingdom that's not so very united. Headlines warn that we are seeing a more fragmented culture, a more tribalised culture, and the same thing appears to be happening across most post-Christian Western nations. This sort of culture warring, identity politics, people moving towards more extreme sides of left and right in politics, and each side increasingly viewing the other side not just as wrong, but as evil. Not just as inhumane, but as inhuman, subhuman. Just think about the endless social media warring that goes on each day, each side accusing the other side of being evil, and yet each side convinced that they are the righteous ones. The philosopher Roger Scruton argues that Christian teaching was in many ways the soul of the civilization that developed in this country, and that part of that soul was the uniquely Christian concept of forgiveness, undeserved forgiveness. But have you noticed just how much unforgiving our society is increasingly becoming? I'm sure you have. You say one word wrong or do one wrong thing and you can be effectively cancelled. And so everyone's afraid of getting caught thinking or saying the wrong thing because there's no forgiveness if you do. We're slowly becoming a culture without any sense of the notion of forgiveness or grace. We're slowly becoming a post-grace culture. And we're also slowly becoming a post-trust culture. Your generation is growing up in a world in which authorities have failed, institutions have failed, financial systems have failed, and families are fragile. And in this sense of failure after failure of authorities and institutions, including failures of the church, as we talked about at the beginning, this has led many young people to conclude that the only thing they can trust is themselves. But here's the problem. What happens when you eventually decide the only thing you can trust is yourself, and then you discover that you can't even trust yourself? Because you realise that you too let people down, that you too hurt other people, and that you too hurt even yourself. Where else have we to go to but God? And when we do come to God, speaking now as a Christian, we find that as broken and imperfect as the church is, it is still God's plan to reach a broken world. Now, to my mind, sometimes I think that's like the worst plan ever, to use broken people to reach a broken world. But it does mean that I, who am also broken, if I'm honest with myself, get to play a part in what God is doing to heal this broken world. So as I acknowledged at the start, Christendom has not always been faithful to Christianity. And terrible things have been done in the name of God by people calling themselves Christians. And it's an awful thing to be on the receiving end of that, to be let down by people you should be able to trust. And I'm so sorry if, like me, you have been hurt by the church or by Christians. However, to argue that if we simply got rid of the church or Christianity altogether, there would be no more hurt and no more division and no more hypocrisy. Imagine all the people living in harmony, just get rid of religion. I think that's naive. To argue that since bad things have been done in the name of God, we should get rid of God, is the same thing as arguing that since bad things have been done in the name of for money, we should get rid of money. Or since bad things have been done in politics, we should get rid of politics. Or since bad things have been done in hospitals, we should get rid of hospitals. Or since bad things have been invented by science, we should get rid of science. But the answer is not to do away with money or politics or healthcare or science or God. For obviously the root of the problem is us as human beings. We are the common factor in every problem. Where bad things have been done in the name of Christianity, they've been done so despite those bad things being so obviously contrary to the teachings of Christ himself. Which means that those bad things ultimately point not to the inherent wickedness of Christianity, but of the human heart, which would try to twist even a religion of love into an instrument of hate. In other words, what I'm arguing is, if we're honest, the poison's not out there, it's in here, it's in all of us, because the heart of the human problem is the problem of the human heart. That's the exact problem that Jesus Christ came into the world to save us from, the problem of ourselves, which is why I still believe Jesus himself is not the cause of the world's problems. He is the answer to our deepest problem, because the love and the forgiveness that comes to us through Jesus Christ, through his life and his death and his resurrection, it really does have the power to transform even the most hate-filled hearts into hearts of compassion, hearts of forgiveness, hearts of love. If we will but move beyond mere religion and into a genuine relationship with Jesus Christ, where he comes to dwell in us by his Holy Spirit to help us live the life of love that we can never live on our own. To finish with a wonderful illustration of this reality. One of the first books about Christianity I ever read was about a Dutch Christian lady called Corrie ten Boom, who became a prisoner of war in a Nazi concentration camp together with her sister and her father for helping Jews to escape the Holocaust. She was the only member of her family to survive the cruel imprisonment. And decades later, you can imagine, she's at an event in which she's speaking in Germany about forgiveness. And she comes face to face with one of her cruel Nazi captors. She'd just been speaking about love, mercy, forgiveness that can be found in Jesus. And now here before her was a man that her heart really could not forgive, one of the worst leaders in the concentration camp, who had apparently turned his life around. But as she records in her book, although she herself did not have the power within herself to forgive this man, she says that by God's strength and Jesus' enabling, she eventually embraced his hand and was able to forgive him. As the children's show host Fred Rogers once said, the only thing evil cannot stand is forgiveness. Through Jesus we can know not only forgiveness with God, but also forgiveness from and for each other in a world that is so desperately in need of both. And so I close with this final word, that despite the checkered history of the church and the failure on many occasions of Christendom to live up to the true teachings of Christianity, I still believe Jesus himself is not the cause of all that is wrong with the world. He is the answer, the antidote, because only he can heal the poison that is within all of us. Thank you for your time.